Reading with your kids.
Hola, niho, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni moli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Himalaya, Ghana, Stitcher Radio, Luminary, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is the author of Fancy Nancy, Jane O'Connor. She is here to celebrate her brand new picture book, Good Job, George. Before we invite Jane into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Candlewood Press, publisher of Tisha and the Blossoms, written by Wendy Medor and illustrated by Daniel Igneous. After a day of being asked to rush through drawings and speed through recess, Tisha asks Mommy if they can have a little slowdown. Can they walk instead of taking the bus? Count cars and seagulls? Can they sit on a beach in the sunshine? This is a tender story about taking the time to experience the world around us. Listen to one another and enjoy the little things in life. What a beautiful, beautiful story. What a great way to spend time with your kids. Check it out today, Tisha and the Blossoms from Candlewood Press. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by Astor the Lonely Airplane by Julie Whitney. We've told you that this book is truly a labor of love for Julie Whitney. It was written after her husband lost his job as a pilot in the pandemic. And he loved his job and he loved the plane that he flew. Astra. This rhyming picture book, written for kids ages 3 to 10, teaches them all about flying, math, geography, overcoming difficult situations, and most of all, having hope. It's available online at Amazon and at bookstores from coast to coast and internationally. You really do want to learn more about this book, and you can by going to AstorTheLonelyAirplane.com. Join us right now from beautiful New York City in New York. Our guest is here today to celebrate a brand new picture book. It's called Good Job, George. Please welcome to the show, Jane O'Connor. Hey, Jane, how are you?
I'm really good, and thank you for having me on.
I'm excited to have you on. I'm excited for you to tell us all about Good Job, George.
Well, I'm happy to do so. The book just came out the beginning of this month, and for years I had written about a little girl character, Fancy Nancy, and I really wanted to write about a little boy. And I now actually finally have a granddaughter in my life after having 2 sons. And when she was a toddler, everything she did, if she took a spoonful of cereal, it was, "Good job, Dovey," and just sort of encouraging her on any accomplishment whatsoever. And so I got it into my head to write a story about a little boy, George, who is just bent on doing every job he has right, putting on his socks, letting his parents strap him into the stroller to go to the playground. But the thing is, he carries it a little too far. And he's a very assertive little boy, and in a paint job at his house, there's sort of a minor mess catastrophe where he hasn't done a good job, but then expiates his sin and all is right at the end. And so that's it's the message, which I always hope in any children's book is very kind of underlying and not out in the open hammering a child over the head, is that we all try and we try our best, but sometimes we mess up.
Indeed, indeed. You know, as you're talking about George and your granddaughter, it reminded me a lot of my son when he was growing up, and he actually thought his middle name was Good Boy. And he would also, people would always say, "What's your name?" And he would also always say, "Christopher Michael Dougherty Good Boy." I guess it was his suffix, but it was all the time until he was about 4 years old, I think.
Well, yes, I know that. It was, you know, I would see with my granddaughter when she was like 2 months old and she had a little mobile over her head, and if she was randomly swatting at it and somehow actually connected with it, it was, you know, good job. So, lots of reinforcement from her parents.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, I mean, I think that that's a great thing for a kid to have that confidence and have all those positive. But I imagine for that kid, for your granddaughter, for my son, you know, the first time they made a mistake and realized, oh, I wasn't such a good boy, I wasn't so perfect then, it must kind of as a big shock to them.
Well, yes, because they're so used to being, as a friend of mine calls it, baby worshipped. But children, I think, come to know also by seeing their parents goof up on stuff that, you know, by making mistakes, you learn.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. That's an important thing, I think, for us to teach our kids is that we're not perfect. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to get a bump and a bruise as long as we get up and we try again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. What a good message to give to kids, especially at a young age. Because one of the things we realize is that so much of the innovations that we've made in history came from mistakes or learning from mistakes.
Exactly. I'm an editor also at Penguin Random House Books for Children. Mm-hmm. And years ago, I had an author do a series that was called Giants of Science. And it was always a biography, but with a lot of social context to show how geniuses, you know, like Isaac Newton, really got to where they were from the mistakes of others before them. And I always wanted to do, but I never have gotten to do it, a series called Brilliant But Wrong, where it would be about people like Tycho Brahe, who believed in you know, that Earth was the center of the universe and was quite a brilliant man, but wrong.
Mm-hmm. Very wrong. Speaking of getting things right and wrong, you are an editor, you mentioned, and so you are helping authors polish their stories and bring characters to life and really kind of make a story as perfect or as close to perfect as it can be. Is it then difficult for you to have your work edited and to have somebody tell you that, not quite right, Jane, let's do that again?
Actually, no. I love getting criticism because it can help me go down a different path in creating a story. Mm-hmm. What's most frightening is an empty blank page where you've got to start from nowhere. So, and my editor at Penguin at Flamingo Books, Margaret Anastas, is just an amazing editor. She was my editor for Fancy Nancy when she was at HarperCollins, and now Margaret Anastas has her own imprint at Penguin Books for Young Readers. And actually, after Good Job George came out, I had to write another story about George, and this one will be called George to the Rescue, but it won't be out for, at least a year or so.
Mm-hmm.
And for the climactic piece of action, if in a picture book you can really talk about climaxes, I was going down one path with it, and she said, no, I think what you're doing is maybe it involved George getting a little bit lost at a playground. And she said, it's too heavy. And so we talked a little bit, and I veered towards a different kind of plot climactic point that then resolves itself quickly with the ending. So it's not just about an editor polishing your sentences. It's really about helping you turn your head in a different direction as a writer.
Interesting. I'd love to explore a little bit more about the mindset of an editor and how important it is, because we have a lot of independent and self-published authors who not only listen to the show, visit the show, and I think for a lot of them, they think, oh, editor, yeah, I just get my buddy to make sure I don't have any typos or grammatic mistakes, but it's much, much more involved than that.
Oh, yes, that's the least of it. Although if I get an unsolicited manuscript, and I really don't very often now because I only work part-time, and it's mostly editing series that I started at Penguin Books from Young Readers. But kind of the first hurdle is you want a clean manuscript with no typos. But saying that, it's really if there's a true story. I've seen manuscripts that are kind of lovely mood pieces, maybe about going out and stargazing and, with a child and parent. But I really like books that have a beginning, middle, and end. And for picture books, I really see sometimes spreads as being a chapter where you turn the page and you get maybe a reveal or the next part of the story. So I'm very story oriented. Even in the nonfiction I edit, and I started a series at Penguin Books for Young Readers about 20 years ago called Who Was, that are biographies for kids sort of, I'd say 7 to 11, and it broadened to have branches of what was the Battle of Gettysburg, and also where is the Great Wall of China. And in all those books, too, the most important thing to me, other than getting the facts straight, which doesn't come into play when you're editing a picture book, is that there's a narrative drive to the biography or the landmark event that's being discussed, that you are not just given a chronology of facts, but that you are told a story that happens to be true.
Is there an art to putting the right editor with the right author, or does it not matter? Can any editor work with any author?
Oh, I don't think. Well, maybe another editor would tell you something otherwise, but for me, if I get a manuscript, I almost have to be able to see, despite its faults, how it could be made better and into a successful book. And if I don't feel that kind of click connection, I really will not take the book. It won't be right for me as an editor. And so most of the writers I work with, I feel very head to head with. And I absolutely feel that way as a writer with Margaret Anastas of Flamingo Books. We will go back and forth about ideas and how to shape something I've written. And sometimes I feel almost like we're getting to share one brain. So for me, both as a writer of a book like Good Job, George, or all the Fancy Nancy books, it's very important for me to feel it's more than just simpatico. It's feeling a real connection, that we're kind of seeing the same thing. And also as an editor, having the same feeling, me towards a writer.
Well, this is really exciting. I really appreciate the fact that you are able to share your kind of perspective as an editor, because I think you're the first person who's been on the podcast who's talked about the art of editing, and it really I'm getting a sense that it really is an art.
It is, and what you have to do as an editor is help the writer get to the absolute best point possible with their manuscript, yet not take over that manuscript with your own ideas. It is the writer's work, and the writer has to feel really comfortable and feel that the changes they're going to make will be the right ones. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes as a writer and an editor, it's difficult for me to keep that balance of not digging into deeply in somebody else's manuscript.
I imagine, yeah. Have you ever had the chance, and I'm not asking you to reveal names, but have you ever had an experience where you started working with an author and you had felt that click from the manuscript, and then you may be a quarter, halfway, even 3/4 of the way through the project, and you're at loggerheads, and you just kind of throw up your hands and say, this isn't working. I think you need to connect with another editor.
Not that far into it. With nonfiction books, like the Who, it's now the series is called Who HQ, Who Headquarters. Mm-hmm. And there are like 300 books in the series. They've been on the New York Times series bestseller list for like 120 something weeks. But occasionally I'll get in touch with a writer I've never worked with before, or that writer gets in touch with me more likely. And they'll want to do someone who I feel, yes, that'd be good addition to the series. But before giving a contract, I'll ask an author to do something on spec, to do a little part of the biography, and maybe a loose outline. And there have been a couple of cases, and this is over 20 years in this particular series, where I see that the writer doesn't have the exact touch for writing nonfiction for kids that are past picture books but aren't ready for really deep nonfiction, that And it's a real art to write for the age that's 7 to 11.
Mm-hmm.
They have very little historical context. So if someone is doing a book on Anne Frank, they won't know really about what was happening in Germany and then the beginning of the war. And you have to fill that in a way that doesn't disrupt the narrative. So it's an art form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This has been really fascinating. I love this look into the relationship between author and editor, and also getting to know Good Job, George. You mentioned Fancy Nancy a couple of times. We should give some credit and some love to Fancy Nancy. Tell us a little bit about that character, please.
Well, if you would like to have Margaret and I, as well as the illustrator, I know the three of us would love to do a podcast with you if you so desire.
I think that would be an awful lot of fun. Absolutely. Well, why don't we give the people listening to this episode a little tease about what we might hear in that podcast?
Yeah, well, the way for me, I always write a manuscript, send it to an editor, and then wait to hear if it's a yes or a no. But after that, it's really the editor's job. And I think a lot of writers who have not been published don't realize this, picture book writers, that you may have an idea of what the illustration should look like. You may even want a friend to send in illustrations for your story. It's not a good idea. It is the editor's job when I send in a story to pick an illustrator that the editor feels will get across the character in the story, what the underlying world and messages. That's not up to the writer. And for George, I had in my head a little boy who really looked a lot like my younger son when he was about 3 years old. And the George that's illustrated in Good Job, George really looks entirely different. And that too, in the editing, when I say the editing, meaning the writer doing more editing of their own story, once you see character sketches, it may lead a writer to make certain changes in their manuscript so that it suits the style or the core of the art better. And so, just as with Good Job, George, I sent the manuscript to Margaret, and she found the illustrator, Andy Joyner, who I think is fabulous, and is very, very different from the artist that Margaret chose for Fancy Nancy. And with Fancy Nancy, I had a vision of a kind of scrawny little girl with braids who looked very much like me at the age of 4 or 5. And Robin Price Glasser's Fancy Nancy was totally different. Kind of a chubby little girl with a mass of kind of reddish brown curls. And after a while, I couldn't think of Fancy Nancy as looking any way other than the way Robin Price Glasser had envisioned her.
Wow, that's neat. Well, I absolutely want to have you all back on. I think that would be a wonderful chat.
A hoot for us.
Yeah. Well, in the meantime, while we're setting that up, please let everybody know where they can go to find out more about Good Job, George, and also find out more about Jane O'Connor.
Well, I know there's a website, probably on Penguin Young Readers and also at HarperCollins Children's Books, to find out about me, but I'm really not that interesting. If anybody wanted to find Good Job George, of course, they can find it at an independent bookstore, big box stores like Target, big chains like Barnes and Noble, and of course, Amazon. So the book is really available in any channel that a customer would want to use.
Yeah, we always encourage our listeners to support their local independent bookstores.
Absolutely.
And
so I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So, if you're a busy person, pick up the phone, give them a call, ask them if they have Good Job George by Jane O'Connor. And if they say not at the moment, just ask them very nicely, and I'm sure they'll have it for you in a day or two.
Yes. Well, that was why I mentioned independent bookstores first.
Yes, absolutely.
Because I really believe they're the beating heart of getting literature into kids and adults' hands.
Yeah. I think we talk about kids falling in love with reading on their parents' laps, and that is a great place. But I think I fell in love with reading as an adult, just being in a bookshop and getting lost for hours just looking at all the different titles.
Yes. Well, I feel the same way. I'm always looking. And my kids, when they were younger, and I was head of the mass market division at Penguin Young Readers, I used to go into a store and immediately reshelve the books, putting all of ours face out, where it got to the point where they would no longer go into a bookstore with me. Reading to a child with both my sons, who are now huge grown men, I read to them long past the age where they could read books themselves, just to have the experience of sharing a book together. And for parents, I would really encourage that. When they got past picture books and easy readers, I would read them Beverly Cleary's books, even though they could have read them on their own. And often they would reread them on their own. And I found books that I did not know about from my own childhood from doing that.
Yeah, so important. We've had a wonderful time speaking with the author of Good Job George, the brand new picture book from our guest, Jane O'Connor. Jane, thank you so much for being with us, and I look forward to your return.
Well, thank you, Jed. It was really fun talking to you, and I'm just very excited about Good Job George.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Anna Lazowski. She'll be here to celebrate T-Rex Can't Tie Their Shoes, her debut picture book. Hey, if you're the author of a fantastic children's book, please do visit readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the author's Click Here button at the top of the page to find out how you can be a guest on the show, to find out how you can submit your book to our Certified Great Read panel, and to find out how you can take advantage of our monthly promotion program. It's all for you, readingwithyourkids.com. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Chris, want to start by thanking our guest, Jane O'Connor. Please be sure to check out her wonderful book, Good Job George. Also want to thank our sponsors, Candlewood Press, the publishers of Tisha and the Blossoms. Great book to spend time with your kids. Also, Julie Whitney and her book, Astor the Lonely Airplane. I want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Murray Grady, Skylar Strauss. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.